Hi friends, welcome to the Bible Project Daily Podcast. Today we're covering another one of these big chapters from Numbers 18, all 32 verses of it. And I've called today's time together our spiritual duty before God. Now, for most of us, I'm sure the main thing we consider as our spiritual duty, or one of them anyway, would be to attend church, to get involved with other Christians. But does that involve more than just attending, listening, learning, and leaving again? Now, of course, doing that is important, but of course, going to church and the activities around it, in the sense of mixing with other Christians in community, I believe are absolutely essential. But church as it's administered in the modern world, I would suggest, does not fully capture the spiritual purpose of community gathering and accountability. In today's episode, I'd like to explore the spiritual duties associated with gathering together, drawing from the book of Numbers, specifically chapter 18. We'll examine the responsibilities God assigned to the tribe of Levi in the Old Testament and consider how, if at all, they might apply to us today. So let's turn our attention to Numbers chapter 18 to gain insights into our spiritual requirements. In Numbers chapter 18, we find God delineating the certain responsibilities to the tribe of Levi. And this passage follows these significant events that we've seen in the last couple of chapters, particularly yesterday, where God unequivocally affirmed Aaron's priesthood, Moses' brother. However, in the preceding chapter, we saw how it finished with the people expressing fear and concern about even being able to approach the tabernacle in the future, fearing death, particularly even the Levites themselves. And it is against this backdrop that God outlines the duties of the Levites and addresses the consequences of unauthorized access to the tabernacle. So let's work through the chapter to understand the implications of this for us today. And welcome to today's episode of the Bible Project Daily Podcast. Okay friends, it's a big chapter today, a lot of verses to work through, so let's begin that process, and I'd like to just read for you the opening verse, Numbers 18 verse 1. Then the Lord said to Aaron, You and your sons and your father's house with you shall bear the iniquity related to the sanctuary, and you and your sons with you shall bear the iniquity associated with your priesthood. Now, verse 1, straight away we encounter a seemingly, it's a sort of a complex overlapping statement, isn't it? It actually regards the responsibilities of two distinct groups, Aaron and his sons and the rest of the Levites. So let's break it down and try and grasp what it's trying to say to us. First here, God is addressing Aaron and his direct lineage. The statement appears ambiguous at first glance as it refers to the same group of people twice. However, if you look closely at it, you realize that God is actually delineating the responsibilities of two separate groups of people from within this tribe called the Levites. One group, comprising Aaron and his direct descendants, is designated for priestly duties, serving the body of the priesthood. Becoming and serving as the body of the priesthood. The other group consists of the remaining Levites who are tasked with the care and maintenance of the tabernacle, but do not hold priestly roles. This division is crucial as it signifies the specific areas of responsibilities assigned to each of these two groups within the Levitical tribe. The priests, descended from Aaron, are responsible for performing the sacred rituals and duties associated with the priesthood, while the other Levites, the wider group, will assist them in these tasks, but primarily they're to attend to the needs of the tabernacle itself, the whole tabernacle structure and the area around it. And additionally, God emphasizes that these responsibilities will come with a heavy burden. for they will bear responsibilities for any sins that are associated in terms of neglect or for failure to fulfill these duties amongst the Levitical divisions. So this concept of bearing sins signifies accountability for any shortcomings in their service to God in this way. And by stating that they shall bear the iniquity, as it's described here, relating to the sanctuary and the priesthood, thereby God is underscoring the seriousness of their roles and the consequences, potential consequences, of neglecting their duties in these areas. In essence, verse 1 just establishes a clear distinction between the priestly lineage of Aaron and all the other Levites, assigning them their different but respective duties and emphasizing the importance of faithfully carrying them out, in a sense saying that they are responsible for how they're carried out. And this distinction will lay the foundation for the subsequent verses which will follow, which will further clarify for us the roles and responsibilities of each group and how these groups are to be enabled, supported, funded, if you like, to do it. So let's read a couple more verses. Verse 2 and 3 says, "Also bring with you your brethren of the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father, that they may be joined with you and serve while you and your sons are not with you before the tabernacle of witness. They shall attend to your needs and all the needs of the tabernacle, but they shall not come near the articles of the sanctuary and the altar, lest they die, they and you also." So it's evident here that God is delineating specific roles within the tribe of Levi. One group has been designated specifically for priestly duties, while the other will serve in essentially supporting roles. And this distinction is crucial. It clarifies that the responsibilities of each group falls on them, and it underscores the importance of all of their specific tasks. And in verse 3, God addresses those Levites specifically who are not priests and outlines their duties. These Levites are tasked with attending to the wider needs of the tabernacle, but are explicitly prohibited from approaching the Holy of Holies and the sacred articles at the altar and the altar itself. So this distinction, if you like, draws a line in the sand from this group and who serve, and it serves as a warning, emphasizes the consequences of overstepping these assigned roles. Moving on to verses 4 and 7, it tells us they are to join you and be responsible for the care of the tent of meeting and all the work of the tent, and no one else may come near where you are. You are responsible for the care of the sanctuary and the altar, so my wrath will not fall on the Israelites again. I myself have selected you, fellow Levites, from among the Israelites as a gift to you, dedicated to the Lord to do the work at the tent of meeting. But only you and your sons may serve as priests in connection of everything else at the altar and inside the curtain. I am giving you the service of the priesthood as a gift. Anyone else who comes near the sanctuary is to be put to death. So God here puts some flesh on the bone of what's going on here. He appoints individuals from the tribe of Levi to assist the priest, that's Aaron and his line, in their duties. And these Levites are again seen to be designated to work alongside the priests, aiding them in their tasks, all the tasks required for the effective functioning of the tabernacle. Again, God reiterates the severity of the consequences for anyone who steps outside their designated group and role, particularly anyone who would attempt to perform priestly functions when they're not called to do so, ultimately saying that they will face death. So essentially, these latest verses are simply there to outline in more detail the division of labor between these two parts of people, one serving as priests, responsible for the sacrifices themselves, and the others supporting them and attending to the general upkeep of the temple and the whole structure around it. Okay, next section is dealing with the offerings to enable the support of the priests, and I'm going to read you the whole long passage from 8 through to 20. And it says, "And the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, Here I myself have also given you charge of my heave offerings, all the holy gifts of the children of Israel. I have given them as a portion to you and your sons, as an ordinance forever. This shall be yours of the most holy things reserved from the fire, every offering of theirs, every grain offering, and every sin offering, and every trespass offering, which they render to me, shall be made holy for you and your sons. In the most holy place you shall eat it, every male shall eat it, it shall be holy to you. This is also yours, the heave offering of their guilt, with all the wave offerings of the children of Israel. I have given them to you, and your sons and daughters with you, as an ordinance forever. Everyone who is clean in your house may eat it. All the best of the oil, all the best of the new wine and the grain, their first fruits, which they offer to the Lord, I have given them to you. Whatever ripe fruit is in their land, which they bring to the Lord, shall be yours. Everyone who is clean in your house may eat it. Every devoted thing in Israel shall be yours. Everything that first opens the womb of all flesh, which they bring to the Lord, whether man or beast, shall be yours. Nevertheless, the firstborn of man you shall surely redeem, and the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem. And those redeemed of all the devoted things you shall redeem, when 1 month old, according to your valuation, for 5 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, which is 20 gerhas. But the firstborn of a cow, the firstborn of a sheep, or the firstborn of a goat, you shall not redeem, they are holy. You shall sprinkle their blood on the altar, and burn their fat as an offering made by fire, for a sweet aroma to the Lord. And their flesh shall be yours, just as the wave beast and the right thigh are yours. All the heave offerings of the holy things, which the children of Israel offer to the Lord, I have given to you and your sons and daughters with you as an ordinance forever. It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord, with you and your descendants with you. Then the Lord said to Aaron, You shall have no inheritance in their land, nor shall you have any portion from them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the children of Israel. Now, this lengthy passage is quite dense, isn't it? But it shifts focus to the priestly responsibilities that were outlined for us beginning here in verse 8. And we see God speaking directly to Aaron here, emphasizing his role in administering this thing called the heave offering and all the other holy gifts from the Israelites. And this allocation is going to serve as a permanent ordinance, ensuring that the ongoing support of the priest through these offerings will be maintained in perpetuity. Now, in the subsequent verses that follow, God goes into great detail, doesn't he, about these various offerings and their associated rituals. But this is all there to underscore the importance of maintaining these sacrificial practices, because they are the thing that will maintain the spiritual well-being of the community, not in and of themselves, but focusing them to come together continually to turn their attention to make sacrifices, to put aside things for the Lord and make that the priority of their life, both in faith and practice. Now, this passage contains a lot of detail, but it's basically there to make the fundamental message clear, in being that every member of the tribe of Levi is going to have a distinct role to play in the worship life of the entire community and their service of God. And adherence to their roles is essential for the preservation of the sacred order and maintain reverence before God by the people, something clearly they've been struggling to do up to this point. And this passage then delves in and spreads out and delves into the various offerings that are designated for the priests, and how they are then to be distinct from burnt offerings, and how each distinct is to be offering is to be treated, whether it is a burnt offering, a grain offering, a sin offering, or a trespass offering. The first part of these offerings are all to be reserved for the maintenance, the sustenance, if you like, of the priests and their families themselves, and they're to be consumed in the holy place. And in verse 11, we saw the specifics of the portion of the offering that is to be shared among the members of the priest's household, which would include his sons and daughters. And then it continues to outline the provisions specifically for the priests, stating that they shall receive the best of the oil. They are to receive the new wine, the first fruits of the grain offering, again focusing on the fact that it is the first fruits that are to be offered to the Lord by the people. And these first fruit offerings are designated as sustenance for the priestly family, signifying their support by and from within the wider Israelite community. Verse 14 addresses the issue of what are called devoted things. Now, in Israel, declaring things such as offering as having belonged to the priests mean they were devoted to them, but it says that it must be the firstborn of all flesh that is brought to the Lord, both human and animals. Because you see, while some offerings may be redeemed with a price, certain firstborn animals and offerings, like those of cows, sheep, goats, are consecrated to the Lord, and their flesh is given to the priests as a portion, and they cannot be exchanged for a monetary value. They're more important than that. And this chapter, this whole arrangement, highlighting this complex systems of offerings and provisions established for the priest, ensures their provision, their maintenance, their sustenance by and via the support of the wider community. And the concept of redemption for certain offerings underscores that there is a sacred nature behind these practices. It's not just all the practical financial supporting of the priests and their families. It's showing that these practices identify and set apart the role of the priests as intermediaries between the wider community, the people, the children of Israel, and the divine God himself. And then we notice towards the end of it that this is all ratified and is said to be a salt covenant. Now, this is where the covenant of salt is introduced. Now, it's a little bit complicated, but the salt covenant specifically signifies a lasting and unbreakable agreement. Unlike other types of covenant, such as a shoe covenant or a blood covenant, they would carry varying degrees of permanence. Even the Old Testament blood covenant was not permanent because it dealt with sacrifice by sacrifice, sin by sin. But a salt covenant was meant to suggest a degree of permanence. In it, the idea behind it is that the participants would exchange salt, symbolizing to symbolize the binding nature of the agreement, which was said to remain in force until one party could go back and retrieve their salt from the other one. So the idea is that salt would be given, it would be used, it would be put on the land, and it would be food, but the promise would be that that promise would stay in place until it could reach a point until the person who gave the salt could go back and retrieve every single grain. Of course, it's saying that's an impossible scenario, and that's why it's got the permanence behind it. So the salt covenant underscores the permanency of the arrangement here between the Lord and the priests, and extending between the priests and the wider community, and that it will extend from generation to generation. Now, drawing parallels to the significance of all these Old Testament covenants, particularly blood covenant and salt covenant, underscores the gravity of this priestly promise established here. Just as God's covenant with Abraham was sealed with blood, signifying the importance and stability of its nature, the covenant with the priests is seen to be similarly unalterable. Its principle will remain, even if its administration may change under the new covenant. And this analogy underscores the internal redemption secured through Jesus Christ, whose sacrifice ensures the permanency of salvation for believers under God. And God's, of course, salvation plan is fully revealed in Christ. Jumping back into Numbers 18, chapter 18 we're looking at today, the allocation of duties and priests and privileges for the priest is seen to continue. They're allocated various offerings as compensation, if you like, for the service. And importantly, it includes the firstborn, the first fruits of produce offerings to the Lord, including the firstborn animals. And all these provisions serve as both sustenance and payment for the priests, reinforcing that the fact that their integral role within the community needs to be maintained by sacrificial offerings. However, alongside these entitlements that the Levitical priests and the Levites wider will receive, the Lord then closes off by reminding them, emphasizing that as the priestly line, they will receive no inheritance of the land among the tribes of Israel when they finally enter in and claim it. While all the other tribes are allocated portions of land after entering the promised land, the tribe of Levi have been tasked with the responsibility simply of the tabernacle and the priesthood and will be exempt from this allocation. Instead, it says the Lord himself is declared to be their portion and their inheritance from among the people of Israel. So in essence, the priests here are granted their duties, their means of sustenance, and their inheritance, but that inheritance is exempt from any form of land ownership, symbolizing that they have a different role, a distinct role as mediators between God and his people. And this allocation and apportionment, complicated and dense though it is, underscores the sacred nature of their service and their unique relationship that they hold, the Levites hold, with their God. The next 5 chapters deal with the tithes for support of the Levites. So now we're moving into financial matters and other tithes. It says, "Behold, I have given the children of Levi all the tithes in Israel as an inheritance in return for their work which they perform, the work of the tabernacle of meeting. Hereafter the children of Israel shall not come near the tabernacle of meeting, lest they bear sin and die. But the Levites shall perform the work of the tabernacle of the meeting, and they shall bear their iniquity. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that among the children of Israel they shall have no inheritance. For the tithes of the children of Israel, which they offer up as a heave offering to the Lord, I have given to the Levites as an inheritance. Therefore I have said to them, among the children of Israel there shall be no inheritance." So again, picking up in this passage, we see the Lord declares himself as the inheritance for this priestly line, highlighting their unique relationship with him. Unlike the other tribes that will receive land as an inheritance, the priests are to find their provision and security in simply serving the Lord. This is meant to underscore in the mind of the Levites and the mind of the people that they are to prioritize their spiritual service over material possessions. And this passage, as I said, it introduces a new significant arrangement regarding tithes. The Lord has now designated that all the tithes in Israel as the inheritance for the Levites in exchange for their service in the tabernacle. And this arrangement will ensure that the Levites are now going to be adequately supported for their work and sets them apart from the rest of Israel to be enabled to do that work. It establishes an enduring decree emphasizing the continuing nature of this throughout the generations to come once they go into the land. And then in this passage, we see at the end, God reinforces this prohibition against the Israelites possessing the land among the tribes of Israel, reminding them, and this time clearly reminding the wider community of this fact as well. Instead, they are going, of course, the wider community are going to receive the land themselves, but they, because of the foregoing of the inheritance in the land by the Levites, they are to offer tithes to them as will become part of their inheritance. And this provision will ensure the sustenance of the Levites and their ability to fulfill their duties without, you might say, the responsibilities and the burden of land ownership. Okay, the last big section is verses 25 to 32, which again looks at a tithe of the Levites. And it says this: "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak thus to the Levites, and say to them, When you take from the children of Israel the tithe which I have given you from them, as your inheritance, then you shall offer a heave offering of it to the Lord, a tenth of the tithe. And your heave offering shall be reckoned to you as though it were grain of the threshing floor, and as the fullness of the winepress. Thus you shall also offer a heave offering to the Lord from all your tithes, which you receive from the children of Israel, and you shall give the Lord's heave offering from it to Aaron the priest. Of all the gifts you shall offer up, every heave offering due to them from the Lord, from the best of them, the consecrated part of them. Therefore you shall say to them, when you have lifted up the best of it, then the rest shall be accounted to the Levites as the produce of the threshing floor and as the produce of the winepress. You may eat it in any place, you and your households, for it is your reward for your work in the tabernacle of meeting. And you shall bear no sin because of it when you have lifted up the best of it. But you shall not profane the holy gifts of the children of Israel, lest you die. Okay, so in the opening of this final section, Moses is instructed to communicate to the Levites, the other Levites, their requirement to themselves offer a heave offering of a tenth of all the tithes they themselves have subsequently or previously received from the children of Israel. So this reciprocal arrangement ensures that the Levites also contribute a tithe to the service of the Lord, reinforcing this idea of mutual dependence, equality through the tiers of the tribes of Israel, and partnership between the priests and the community. It aligns all the goals in the same way. The distribution of tithes will serve as a means of supporting the Levites in their service at the tabernacle, whilst emphasizing their unique role within the community. And the arrangement reflects this balance of responsibilities across all the people, but it ensures the sustainability of worship and service amongst the children of Israel at that time. So the heave offering taken from the tithes received by the children of Israel, is given to the priest, specifically to Aaron. It itself is to be offered as of the best of the tithes, as an offering themselves, symbolizing this community-wide, consecrated, sacred nature of all these offerings. Now, we can't go through this whole topic of giving and tithing without addressing it a little bit. Clearly, we see the principle of tithing here in its introduction, its roots, if you like, in the Old Testament. It's actually even in place before the Mosaic Law was established. We see an example of it in Abraham before the law had been given to Moses. How under the Mosaic Law it is established, and there were 2 tithes, each equivalent to 10%, and then there was another tithe of 10% once every 3 years. So the total tithing under the Old Testament Mosaic Law was actually averaged out 23.33% per year. And the system of tithing was inbuilt from the start and is obviously a significant aspect of the religious practice. However, in the New Testament, tithing, it has to be said, is not explicitly commanded. You might say it's not even emphasized. Now, it's mentioned during the ministry of Christ, but it doesn't feature prominently in the teachings, and not even in the teachings of the apostles themselves. Instead, the New Testament tends to emphasize giving proportionally and according to one's prosperity, and more importantly, to give with joy. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, which is probably the main passage in the New Testament to talk about giving, focuses on what's called cheerful giving, highlighting the importance of the attitude behind giving rather than just strictly adhering to a tithe. In practical terms, this means that while the figures related to tithing can be helpful as a guideline for giving, especially for those who have the means to do that, it's not a rigid, I would say it's not actually a rigid requirement under the new covenant of grace. The emphasis is indeed on giving generously, but also giving joyfully and with a heart of gratitude, rather than being bound to these strict legalistic rules. Ultimately, giving here is about supporting the ministry on one hand, the wider ministry of the community and helping those in need, reflecting, of course, the need then to give with a spirit of generosity and compassion, really just as we see exemplified in the life of Jesus. Now, in Numbers 18, regarding these tithes given and received by the Levites, they were required to offer the best of the gifts they receive as this thing called a heave offering to the Lord. So this indicates that even in the role as recipients of tithes, they were to prioritize tithing themselves, if you like, giving back to God the finest portion of what they received. And that's what underscores the principle here, that everyone, including those working in full-time service to the Lord, are to contribute to the wider work of the Lord through giving. Now, this passage concludes by reiterating that the Levites are to present the tithes to the Lord and then enjoy the remainder with their families. However, they were to ensure that the first fruits, the best of the offering, portion to the Lord, honoring him, should be given first. Essentially, this whole chapter is here to illustrate that these offerings were there to serve as some financial support to the tribe of Israel so that the work of God could be carried on, continued, done within their community. Now, having said all of that, you might quite reasonably be saying, well, that's all well and good, but how does this apply to me today? Well, I think there are still 5 key takeaways that we can utilize from these Old Testament chapters. Firstly, I think it's essential to have a basic understanding of the major institutions depicted in the Bible, in the scriptures, in the Old Testament to truly make sense of what's going on here. So that's the underlying principle. Secondly, it's crucial to grasp that true worship of God is and always will be directed by God himself. It's not a game where we make up the rules as we go along. God calls us to worship, and part of our worship is our giving of our resources, including our functional resources, to him. Thirdly, having a general knowledge of what God's idea of worship is, and the fact that it includes this aspect of it, is of course important, because it forces us to focus on not what we like or appreciate in worship, that we should consider first what God pleases, and definitely one of the requirements are that we are to give. Fourthly, understanding the roles of the priest and now how Jesus Christ has taken the role as high priest gives us a more profound, one would say, a wider knowledge, and one that is more able to be applied into the communities in which we live by recognizing that he now fulfills those priestly duties. All the ancient Hebrew worship and the thinking and means behind it revealed in this passage, Numbers 18, are actually fulfilled by Jesus Christ now as in his function as the high priest. And the book of Hebrews tells us that. And then finally, contrasting this highly regulated structure of the priesthood in the Old Testament, you can't help but notice the profound difference under the New Covenant, because everyone has direct access to God. And that's afforded to us as believers in Jesus Christ. And what a privilege it is for us believers today to be in that position, which means we're not bound by the minutiae of these Old Testament regulations, but it's important still to discern how the overarching principles of what they represented still apply to us today. Of course, the temple no longer exists. We're not under the law, yet as Christians, we are still called to honor God with our lives and our worship as he instituted it, and part of that is we're meant to give to support the work of the ministry. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to close by just exploring that for a moment. It's essential to address the issue of attending church faithfully. Now, don't get mixed up with the word. Church just means a community of Christian believers. This is how it's described in Hebrews. In Hebrews 25, which of course, as I've said before, Hebrews is the go-to book for interpreting anything to do with the Mosaic or the Levitical law. And Hebrews does tell us, as New Covenant believers, to not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as is the manner of some. So The pattern we're seeing today of people no longer attending church, perhaps just getting their teaching online, well, this is nothing new. That was the manner of what some were doing in that day. But this verse in the New Testament, Hebrews, underscores the importance of not ditching the idea of having fellowship with other believers, emphasizing the significance of regular attendance and gathering together. At the end of the day, there are some things as a Christian you cannot do it on your own. You can only do them in partnership with other people, and you also can never be called to account if you fall by the wayside, if you're not in relationship with other believers. However, this is not just about merely showing up in a building every Sunday. It's about actively participating and ministering to one another. Hebrews chapter 10 highlights our responsibility, and that involves encouraging each other people daily, indicating that our role extends beyond passive attendance. And secondly, supporting the community of faith financially is crucial in enabling this to happen, just as outlined in some depth in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Those who serve in the ministry, particularly those who teach the Word of God and equip the saints for works of service, well, all I'll say, it's a biblical principle to contribute financially to their needs because they are meeting the needs of the wider church. And then finally, the traditional notion of attending church merely to go in to listen and then leave, that needs revision in our mind. Learning from sermons is valuable. Learning from what is being taught online, even by me today, is important. But our responsibility as individual Christian believers goes beyond just passive absorption of information and becoming better and better in understanding. We need to apply it and use it to encourage other believers that we come into contact with. Real world, I believe. Financially, recompense the pastors. Recompense the people who are teaching and are ministering to you and equipping you for ministry. But remember that every member of the body Christ has a role to play in this ministering to one another. We are called to serve. We are called to uplift one another. We shouldn't just rely on the local church leaders to do that. We're meant to be involved. And of course, we can't do that if we're just sitting at home on our own. And moreover, the whole concept here that was revealed in Numbers chapter 18 is about giving of our best to God. It's what the whole passage underscored. We're called to give our best to Him in every aspect of our life. And that will include our efforts, our time, our abilities, but also our financial resources. God desires our utmost devotion and excellence. This principle, of course, then, under the new covenant, extends way beyond these percentages and material offerings. It's now meant to encompass your entire life, your entire mind, heart, as well as the actions that are inspired out of it. So in essence, our compensation for doing that in believers is not meant to be focuses on percentages or even earthly rewards that we might gain back in response to living that way, but in the eternal rewards awaiting us at the judgment seat of Christ as we enter into His kingdom. Therefore, friends, strive to give of your best to God always, knowing that any act of faithful service will never be in vain. Thanks for being with me here today. Okay, that was a big one today. So I'll close out quickly and just say thanks for being with me. All these free resources, the podcast itself and the sources around it, are all freely available all over the internet because there's a small community of people who on Patreon are enabling me to do this. It's not just about the podcast. Please be aware that there's an episode notes page and a full transcript of everything I say, which is yours to use in whatever way you find helpful. is all copyright free. Which means wherever you're listening to this podcast from, why not subscribe? Won't cost you a penny. It's been paid forward for you. And that way, by doing that, you'll have made the decision to make the in-depth study of the Word of God part of the rhythm of your daily life. And that's a great decision to make. I promise God will bless you in doing that. You can carry on from where we pick up today, or you can go right back to the beginning 750, 800 episodes ago and begin the whole journey of going through the whole Bible, chapter by chapter, verse by verse with me. That's it for today. I do hope I'll see you back here again tomorrow. Well, it'll be tomorrow for me. Whatever day works for you is good. At whatever pace works for you is good. But I'll just close by saying thanks again, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye from the Bible Project Daily Podcast. Bye-bye now.